Hey everyone, today I am very excited to bring you the review of this gorgeous rifle here. This is a Henry 3030, specifically their all-weather version, hence the hard chrome coating as in the black furniture on this thing. Now I have made a couple changes, as I'm sure the astute among you have noticed, and we'll definitely be covering that in pretty good depth here shortly. But first, let's show you some footage of this thing in action, and we'll break down how this thing typically comes out of the box, and then my experiences with this thing overall. So let's go ahead and start with the muzzle end. Again, I have made some changes and I'll address those as we get to them. And I'll try to explain how things come from the factory. I have a ton of shooting footage with this thing as configured from the factory, so you'll definitely see that quite a bit in this video. But first up, we have just a regular front sight up here, nothing too fancy going on. Basically a little bit of a brass bead to use as your front sight, and it just kind of works. Overall, it's a buckhorn or semi-buckhorn setup, and that front bead works just fine. It's not hooded or anything crazy like that. Again, just kind of works. Right down here, we have the magazine tube. It's like not even a quarter turn, maybe like a 1/16 of a turn lock-in to actually pull the magazine tube out. And that's how we're gonna load it. We'll talk about that in much more depth later. But just so you know, that is how we load this specific model of it. Moving down, this is the Midwest Industries Handguard. If you saw the Marlin review, this is going to be very, very similar. Just mounts in place of the factory handguard. Typically, it's going to have a wood front handguard that's very reminiscent of this stock wood, kind of that black finish on it, which is a really gorgeous complement to the hard chrome coating on the receiver, barrel and action and all that fun stuff. And it's just going to have a little barrel band retainer. I actually had a very special someone out there who knows who he is install this for me because I didn't want to go into that myself, hence why I don't have a video install on this. It's definitely something you want a gunsmith to do. It's a little bit more of an intensive process, but I think a very nice addition to the overall look of this rifle. Moving back, as I said, we have a kind of a semi-buckhorn style sight setup, which is elevation adjustable using a little ladder here. In comparison to some of the other options on the market, as far as iron sight lever guns go, I really like the sight picture that this thing provides. It's been able to let me be reasonably accurate, i.e. hitting a steel silhouette at 100 yards with very little issue. However, as you can see, I've also configured this thing with optics, so I've gotten a lot of experience outside the iron sights, because generally my eyes just don't like iron sights, so having another option was much appreciated. Moving back, I did add a optic rail back here. This is specifically a 1913 style rail. I think this was from Henry. Henry actually sent this out to me, which I guess full disclosure, Henry sent me this rifle for free. I did not pay for it. They did not send me any money. They just gave me the rifle to be able to do a review and continued testing on it, as well as doing other 30-30 stuff. So just to put that out there. Then they also did send me out some different optics rails to be able to test this thing in a couple different configurations, and they also sent me this lever, which we're about to talk about. Right now I have a Vortex red dot on it, which has been working just fine. Again, more than accurate enough to, especially more accurate for me than the iron sights, to be able to hit steel silhouettes at 100 yards, which, you know, for my applications of this rifle, I can't ask for much more than that. Moving down, as you can see, this is a larger loop than you probably see in the general product pages for this. Typically, the loop is going to be a very linear, small loop. Some people like the small loop, some people like the big loop. I personally, in this style of rifle, really like the big loop, and again, I'll be talking about that more in depth later. As far as the action goes, there is no active safety. The only safety is a transfer bar. So similar to a lot of those revolvers out there, it's going to use a transfer bar, which basically means that the hammer will not impact the primer of the cartridge or the firing pin unless the trigger is being pulled. As you pull the trigger, it actually physically lifts a transfer bar up, which then transfers the force from the hammer onto the firing pin and then ignites the cartridge in the chamber. So what you can do, what that basically means is that, and there's no half cock position, I should point that out. What that means is if I wanted to, I could have a round in the chamber, holding the hammer, pull the trigger, start to let the hammer go, release the trigger, and then drop that hammer on a loaded chamber and not have that round go off. And now if I'm out hunting or anything like that, all I have to do is cock back the hammer and then the gun's ready to go. As far as the trigger on this thing, it's a very nice trigger. Again, not too dissimilar from some of the other lever guns I've tested out there, but a nice, fairly crisp trigger. One of the nice things about lever guns is we don't have to worry about talking about reset, because that's not really a thing with lever guns, since you have to actually cycle the lever, which I will say has been exceptionally smooth. Now, this is the only, well, actually that's not true. For the most part, this is the only Henry that I have a lot of shooting experience with. The gun store I work at has a couple other Henrys, especially the rimfire stuff. We have a lot of rimfire Henrys, and just running the action on all of them have been really nice. At first I thought maybe it's just the hard chrome has a nice slick surface to it that causes it to run really nicely, but every single Henry I've handled has just been a really nice, clean, and smooth action, and this is certainly no exception to that. It lets you run it nice and fast without having to worry about anything getting hung up. I haven't had any issues with, failures to feed or rounds getting stuck or anything crazy like that. It's just been a nice, smooth, and pleasant experience. Moving down to the stock, as you can see, we have a straight wrist here, which is kind of my least favorite thing about this rifle, but again, we'll get to that more later. We have a nice upswept piece here for your cheek, which puts my face comfortably in line with the iron sights. Once you start mounting optics to it, you start getting more into that chin weld arena, but if you're just running iron sights, as I figure most people probably will, it's gonna work just fine. We do have a sling loop down here. The factory Handguard retainer also has a sling loop, so if you wanted to put a sling on this, you absolutely could. And then we have a nice soft rubber pad back here, which doesn't do a whole lot for recoil mitigation, not that you need it with a 30-30, but it does give you a little bit of padding, and especially that little bit of extra grip when you're shooting it to just keep it nicely in your shoulder. So now that we've run down the features that this rifle has, let's go ahead and roll in some more shooting footage, and then we'll talk about the accuracy that I've experienced with this rifle. So I really didn't know what to expect when it came to accuracy with this rifle. Again, I don't have a ton of experience with lever guns. This is, between this and my Marlin 336, it's really the most volume of shooting I've ever done with any sort of lever guns. And I didn't have any base of expectation for the accuracy of this rifle. I figured it was going to be reasonably accurate, but I really didn't know just how accurate. And again, as I've said earlier, with both the iron sights and especially with red dots, I can make hits on steel at 100 yards, no problem, but that's not really that hard to do, especially with a rifle, at an 11 by 7 or 11.5 by 17 silhouette. If a rifle can't do that at 100 yards, there's probably a problem with either you or the rifle, most likely you though. However, I went ahead and put a scope on this thing at one point, and in order to do that, I did have to drift out the rear sight just because the scope wasn't going to clear otherwise, but it's a very easy and simple process to do that. But I put a scope on here and I shot some groups the other day just to see how accurate this rifle was. And I was very, very impressed. So let me, basically, I guess just to set this up, whenever I'm putting rounds through a gun that I'm testing, and even if it's a gun that I'm not testing, typically I'll have a camera running just in case a malfunction happens or anything like that. I can capture it on camera. So I went ahead and was shooting accuracy groups. I didn't have a downrange camera set up because I wasn't expecting much. And I guess I'll let myself from the past pick it up from here. Not bad at all. I will take that all day long. That's probably an MOA group. I'm very happy with that. Wow. I'm going to walk you down there and look at that just so we can all enjoy that together. That, I will take that all day long. That's not even my middle finger. That's easily half inch center to center. That's easily one MOA because we're at the 50-yard line. That's with hand loads. I like that. Let's fill up the rest of these. So as you can see, that was a very impressive group, especially for hand loads. Now again, I'm only shooting at 50 yards here, but to me that's still very respectable. So I went ahead and tried a couple other loads and I got just phenomenal results. Now on the last two groups, I should also mention, I tried to give the barrel a little bit of time to cool in between groups. It never got cold, but it was to the point where I could hold it and not, be uncomfortable before I'd start the next string of 5. And on the last two groups, you'll see one flyer each. I fully blame that on myself, but between 4 different loads, 1 hand load and 3 factory loads, I was looking, if we exclude the flyers, easily between 1 to 1.5 MOA. If we include the flyers, on those two groups, it's closer to 2 MOA. But still, that is very, very respectable, especially for a 30-30. Now, the thing about 30-30 is unless you're using special ammo, ballistic coefficient isn't there, so it's not going to necessarily hold up at longer ranges, but at least out to 100 yards, this thing has been phenomenally accurate, at least more accurate than I expected it. I mean, to get a 1-minute gun potential, at least, out of a rifle like this, I could not ask for much more than that. So really, really impressed by the accuracy that I got out of this, and so much so that I wanted to take the scope off because I didn't want to, jinx anything and have to shoot more groups with a scope on it. So I went ahead and put the red dot back on it just so that I didn't ruin my groups with this rifle. So let's go ahead and get into my overall experience and thoughts on this rifle, as well as on the pros and cons of something like this. So as I said, Henry did send this to me at no cost to myself, and which I very much appreciate. And right away, I was just really, really impressed, because the other gun I'd had up to that point was a Merlin 336, a new production one under the Freedom Group banner. And if you've seen the review that I've done on that one, I was less than impressed, I'll put it that way. So feeling this one, there was a night and day difference immediately noticeable with this thing. Again, just how smooth the action was, just how nice the sight picture was with the iron sights. Basically everything about it was far more refined and polished. It was immediately noticeable to me. Now, one of the things that I did also notice pretty quickly is really two things. The way that the straight wrist works with my personal body mechanics, as well as having to do the front reloading. So basically, I guess just to run you through the process, in order to load this gun, there's no side loading gate. If you're used to like the Winchester 94s or some of the Marlins out there, you're probably used to a side loading gate. This does not have that. The way to load it is up here in the front. If you notice right here under this is the magazine tube, and at the bottom you see this little kind of brass, what looks like a bullet silhouette. Basically what that is the magazine tube. You pull that out, you'll see that little orange follower, and then you just slide the rounds down in. You don't want to do it vertically. You want to kind of ease the rounds in so that they're not banging bullets against the primers. But you slide them in, you push the magazine tube back down, and then lock it in place. Now there's a couple downsides to that, in my personal opinion. First of all, it's kind of awkward and cumbersome to do. It's not something you're gonna do, thankfully, any of us are gonna do under stress, but if you had to do it under stress, it's really awkward to kind of have to pull the gun out of your shoulder or out of any sort of traditional, I guess, modern workspace context. Pull it, like basically hold it upside down, reach up here to the muzzle, which is kind of a huge no-no in all firearm safety rules. Reach around the muzzle, pull the magazine tube out, drop the rounds in, and push it back in. Another problem exists in that we're using a rimmed cartridge. Pretty much most lever guns are firing rimmed cartridges, which means that the magazine tube, the internal magazine tube, has to go around the rims of those cases. And every once in a while, it'll kind of get hung up, and I kind of have to pat it around and try to jiggle it around to actually get it to go closed on a magazine. Now, Henry does say that this is a 5-round magazine tube, so you can have 5+1 in the chamber. My personal experience has been I can kind of force 6 into the magazine tube, so I could theoretically do 6+1, but I'm probably not going to additionally load one, just because once I have a round in the chamber, even if the hammer's down and theoretically safe, I don't like reaching around the muzzle with a round in the chamber. Some people might say that I'm crazy or that I'm, overly cautious, and yeah, you're probably right. I don't want to shoot my hand off, and usually a good way to avoid that happening is not putting your hand in front of a muzzle, especially a muzzle that is in front of a live round in a chamber. So I'm not going to top this thing off, but realistically speaking, most people who are using this for any practical sense are not going to be topping it off. Typically, people are going to be using this for hunting or just fun, and in which case 5+1 is going to be more than enough. So put 6 in the magazine tube, rack 1 into the chamber, and you're going to be fine. Now, the other thing that I was saying I wasn't a huge fan of right out the gate was the straight wrist on this. Now, again, maybe it's just my biomechanics, just the way my body works. It's kind of awkward for me to be able to squeeze up with my hand in that firing position. So basically, just to demonstrate here, in order for the gun to fire, if you have the hammer back, in order for the gun to fire, the lever here has to be completely closed. If it's slightly open, it'll deactivate the trigger. So if I'm up here and I'm running rounds, and I don't get it all the way up, well, that's a bad example, I'm gonna start pulling on the trigger and nothing's gonna happen until I actually close it all the way, which for me is an awkward squeeze to do, having to squeeze up with my wrist like this. I would much prefer it if it had a curved wrist. Now I know traditionally Henrys have straight wrists, so there's no reason for them to change that, but they do have models out there that have curved wrists. The 4570s have curved ones. Some of their other centerfire rifle cartridges have curved wrists, but all the 3030s, the 35 Remingtons, all those have a straight wrist. And again, I get it, I totally understand, but just personally for me, biomechanically speaking, it's just kind of awkward. And there have been occasions where I cycle the action and it goes click, or it doesn't go click at all because I'm not able to pull on the trigger. And with that too, because my wrist wants there to be a curved wrist to the stock, I found myself getting my hand kind of curled up in the straight loop that was here originally. So that's one of the reasons why I had them send me out one of the large loops. That way I could more comfortably hold my hand in here, still curved, basically my brain pretending that there's a curved wrist on the stock. And again, that could be part of why I was having those issues, because I wasn't pulling straight up. But again, just biomechanically for me, it just isn't as comfortable as a curved wrist. But other than those things, I've been absolutely in love with this rifle. Those are the only two downsides I see. And it's worth mentioning that now one of the biggest issues, that magazine tube, is pretty much irrelevant, because Henry, as of NRA show, has announced that they're going to be doing side loading 3030s. I think it's 35 Remington, 3030, and then 30 something or other, some weird cartridge that I wasn't super familiar with because I'm not typically a lever gun shooter. So now you can get Henrys that will allow you to load from the front if that's what you're used to, but will now also have that side loading gate, which is awesome. So now really the only thing I have left is that curved wrist, but I think that's something that I can just train around and get more used to firing it in a configuration like this. I guess the only other thing that could be considered a downside to a Henry over some of the other options on the market is the cost. Now, the all-weather versions like this, MSRP for right around $1,000, and that is not cheap by any definition. That is not cheap. However, typical street price is going to be quite a bit cheaper than that. In fact, if you were to order one through the store that I work at, it's going to be closer to that $850-ish range. So not that much more expensive, if in fact not actually cheaper than some of the other options on the market in an all-weather configuration like this one. Now, if you didn't want the all-weather version, if you wanted more of a traditional look, you can actually get it even cheaper than that. That's just if you want that hard chrome finish with the black furniture. Now, while we're talking about furniture, I should probably address the handguard here. If you've seen the Marlin video, you know why I did something like this. And it's just to make it more practical for me. If there are people who live in states who can't have semi-automatic rifles, or especially people who live in countries who can't have semi-automatic rifles, but they can have lever guns. And to me, this might be a better option for some people than, say, a bolt action gun. It can be a lot quicker, can be a lot smoother, reloading is harder, but it might not be a bad choice. And in that context, having a light attached to your gun is extremely important, in my opinion, to be able to positively identify what you're shooting at. Now, outside of that self-defense context, these are going to be, especially something like 3030 is going to be really popular with hog hunters. Now, most of the time they're using other cartridges, especially AR-based rifles, but people are starting to get bored of ARs. Everyone has one, everyone's been shooting one. People kind of want something different, and these lever guns are giving people a good opportunity to do that. And now you can mount an IR light to this, be using any sort of night vision to do that hog hunting or any sort of pest control or anything like that with one of these rifles, and have a lot of fun in the process and just have something different. Again, market's been saturated with ARs for years. People are looking for something different. This could be that something different for you. Now, it is worth mentioning, as I said, the slide loading gate versions are not currently available in the all-weather version like this one. It's just going to be, I think, the brass colored receiver with the blued barrel and magazine tube and wood furniture. I'm sure it's coming though. Just give Henry time. They're slowly bringing that stuff in, so give them time, and I'm sure that stuff will be coming in the not so distant future, and I'm very, very excited for that. So really there's not too much else to say other than that. It's just been a really great rifle that I've had a lot of fun with, and I expect to have a lot more fun with as time goes on. Now there's a couple people I want to thank for this video. First of all, I want to thank Henry for being willing to send one of these things out. You know, it's not something that would have ordinarily been in my price range, or at least would have been harder for me to justify picking one of these up. So by them being willing to do that, it's allowed me to bring this in front of the camera for you guys. One of the other people I want to thank is a gentleman named Dave, who lives here locally to me. He saw me posting stuff about 30-30s, and he said, hey, I got a ton of 30-30 bullets. I'm never going to load them. Do you want them? And I said, sure. So he gave me a couple hundred 30-30 projectiles, and that's allowed me to run the round count up on these considerably over what I would have ordinarily been able to afford, because I have been hand loading for this and the other lever guns that I've been testing in 30-30. And so without him, I wouldn't have been able to get nearly the amount of rounds for these guns that I have so far. So big thanks to Dave for being willing to do that. And then I also want to thank my patrons for being able to help me be able to purchase that ammo and get that good quality brass cased factory ammo so that I could then reload as well as test some factory loads. The contributions from Patreon go directly back into this channel, and it does make an enormous difference. And because of that, I try to give thanks back by doing things like doing exclusive content over there. We do live streams, we do giveaways, we have a Discord server set up, and you know, some of the, to give you guys an idea of the exclusive videos I do as testing was going on with this rifle and others, I'll do basically every time I go to the range, I'll try to do an update video, say, hey, here's what I did with the rifle today, here's how I handled it, here's what's going on, etc., to give them an idea of how things are progressing and give them an idea of how the rifle's performing along the way so that they can kind of keep track and all that. So if any of that stuff sounds enticing to you, or if you just want to financially support the channel and keep content coming out on a regular basis, definitely check out my Patreon. It is greatly appreciated. But really, other than that, there's not much else to say than, if you're looking for a modern, a new production lever gun, I really don't think you're going to do much better than Henry, and there's a lot of people who are going to echo that sentiment, and it's for very good reason. All you have to really do is handle some of the new production ones out there, and you'll see why for yourself. But anyway, with all that said, as always, I hope you got something out of this video, and I really appreciate you watching.